Discipline is often misunderstood. Most people think it is a personality trait, a gift, something you either have or you don't. They look at the person who wakes up at 5 in the morning, trains consistently, builds steadily, and they assume that person was born different. More focused, more serious, more driven. But that assumption is comforting and wrong. Discipline is not a trait. It is a trained response. It is the ability to act in alignment with long-term intention rather than short-term emotion. And like any trained response, it can be developed, strengthened, reinforced, or neglected. The problem is that most people try to build discipline using motivation. And motivation is unstable. It feels powerful in the beginning. It surges through you when you set a new goal, when you watch an inspiring video, when you promise yourself that this time will be different. But motivation is emotional energy, and emotions fluctuate. Discipline, on the other hand, must operate independently of emotional weather. This is where the confusion begins. People chase intensity instead of stability. They seek inspiration instead of structure. They mistake excitement for commitment. And when the excitement fades, they interpret that fading as failure. It isn't failure. It is biology. Your brain is wired for comfort, efficiency, and reward. It prefers habits that conserve energy and produce immediate satisfaction. It resists behaviors that feel uncertain or effortful. And unless it is trained differently, it will default to what is easy. This is not weakness. It is design. The question is not whether your brain resists discipline. The question is whether you know how to train it. Imagine a lotus flower. It grows in muddy water, surrounded by murk, debris, and instability. Yet it rises clean above the surface, unstained, balanced, centered. The lotus does not fight the mud. It grows through it. That is the essence of discipline. You do not eliminate distraction, temptation, or emotional fluctuation from your environment. You build something within you that rises above it. Most people try to discipline their behavior without restructuring their internal architecture. They attempt to force change through pressure and shame. They rely on bursts of willpower. They promise themselves intensity. But willpower is a limited resource. It depletes. If discipline depends solely on resisting impulses, eventually the impulses win. The Lotus Method is different. It does not begin with force. It begins with foundation. Before you attempt to master your actions, you must understand your identity. There is a quiet difference between someone who says, "I am trying to be disciplined," and someone who says, "I am a disciplined person." The first statement implies effort. The second implies alignment. Your brain responds to identity more consistently than it responds to goals. When your identity shifts, your behavior begins to follow naturally. Not perfectly, not instantly, but steadily. This is not motivational language. It is neurological conditioning. Every repeated action strengthens a neural pathway. Every repeated thought reinforces a belief. Over time, these patterns solidify into automatic tendencies. If you repeatedly break promises to yourself, your brain registers that inconsistency as normal. If you repeatedly follow through, even in small ways, your brain registers reliability as part of who you are. The lotus does not bloom in a single day. It establishes roots first. Most people skip this stage. They want visible change, immediate transformation, dramatic shifts. They want to feel different before they act differently. But discipline rarely feels dramatic. It feels repetitive, quiet, sometimes boring. And this is where many abandon the process, because they are addicted to stimulation. The modern world has trained your brain for distraction, notifications, quick rewards, endless novelty. Every swipe produces a small dopamine release. Every new input creates a spike of interest. In comparison, disciplined effort feels slow. There is no instant applause for finishing a difficult task. No external reward for resisting a craving. No public recognition for consistency. The reward is internal and delayed. And if your brain is conditioned for immediacy, delayed reward feels unsatisfying. So the first principle of the Lotus Method is not about pushing harder. It is about retraining your reward system. You must learn to derive satisfaction from completion rather than stimulation, from execution rather than intention, from structure rather than excitement. This requires awareness. Notice what you seek when you feel resistance. Do you reach for your phone? Do you open a new tab? Do you shift tasks unnecessarily? Do you justify postponement? Each of these behaviors is your brain seeking relief. Relief from discomfort, relief from uncertainty, relief from effort. The lotus grows in discomfort. It does not wait for clear water, and neither can you. Discipline does not eliminate discomfort. It normalizes it. When you train your brain properly, discomfort becomes a signal to lean in, not withdraw. But this training must be deliberate. It begins with what the Lotus Method calls the root. The root is your internal foundation, your reason, your clarity, your environmental alignment. Without a root, discipline collapses under pressure. If you do not know why you are building discipline, your effort will remain fragile, surface level, reactive. Clarity strengthens resilience. Ask yourself, not superficially but honestly, why does discipline matter to you? Not the social answer, not the impressive answer, the real one. Is it freedom, confidence, mastery, financial stability, self-respect? If your reason is weak, your discipline will be weak. And once clarity is established, environment must follow. Most people overestimate willpower and underestimate environment. If your phone is within reach, you will use it. If distractions are visible, you will attend to them. If temptations are convenient, you will justify them. You are not above your surroundings. You are shaped by them. The disciplined person is not the one who resists temptation constantly. It is the one who designs their environment to reduce it. The lotus does not grow in chaos without structure. It has a stem, and structure is what turns intention into habit. But before we move to that stage, understand this. Discipline is not built through intensity. It is built through consistency. Small actions repeated daily reshape identity more powerfully than dramatic promises made once. One completed task matters more than 10 ambitious declarations. One kept promise strengthens self-trust more than 5 inspiring plans. The lotus rises slowly, but once it breaks the surface, it remains steady. The second stage of the Lotus Method is the stem. If the root represents clarity and environmental alignment, the stem represents self-control under pressure. It is the structure that carries your intention upward, through distraction, through impulse, through emotional fluctuation. This is where discipline becomes visible, not in theory, not in identity statements, but in behavior that remains steady even when emotion does not. Most people misunderstand self-control. They believe it means suppressing desire, forcing compliance, overpowering impulse through sheer strength. But suppression creates tension, and tension eventually snaps. True self-control is not violent resistance. It is calm redirection. When an impulse appears, to procrastinate, to quit, to seek comfort, you do not attack it. You acknowledge it, and then you choose differently. This ability to choose differently is trainable. Your brain runs on loops. Cue, craving, response, reward. When you feel discomfort, your brain seeks relief. It offers a familiar behavior that has previously reduced tension. You follow it, you feel temporary relief, and the loop strengthens. Over time, this becomes automatic. To build discipline, you must interrupt the loop. Not once, not occasionally, but consistently enough that a new pathway begins to form. This is why small, immediate actions matter. When hesitation appears, your mind begins negotiation. It suggests delay. It rationalizes avoidance. It invents reasons why now is not the right moment. If you allow the negotiation to continue, emotion will win. The disciplined response is simple. Reduce the time between intention and action. Do not allow the mind to spiral. The longer you wait, the stronger the resistance becomes. There is a quiet power in immediate movement. When you act quickly, you bypass overthinking. You train your brain to associate intention with execution rather than delay. Over time, this reduces friction. But understand something deeper. Friction is not your enemy. It is your training ground. Every time you choose long-term benefit over short-term comfort, you are strengthening neural circuitry related to executive function. You are reinforcing your prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning, impulse control, and decision-making. Discipline is not a moral achievement. It is a neurological upgrade, and upgrades require repetition. The stem grows upward because it is reinforced continuously by nutrients from the root. In the same way, self-control is reinforced by clarity and environment. If your reason is weak, your stem bends. If your environment is chaotic, your stem struggles. But when clarity and environment are aligned, self-control strengthens. There is another element here that most ignore: delayed gratification. Modern culture encourages immediate reward, fast results, instant access, rapid stimulation. The brain adapts accordingly. It begins to expect reward quickly. When reward is delayed, frustration appears. This frustration is not a sign of incapability. It is a sign of reconditioning. When you delay checking your phone, when you postpone a craving, when you continue working past the moment of boredom, you are stretching your tolerance for delayed reward. At first, this feels uncomfortable, but discomfort signals growth. The brain learns through contrast. When you consistently delay gratification, the eventual reward becomes more satisfying. Completion feels deeper, progress feels earned, and something subtle happens: your baseline shifts. You no longer require constant stimulation to feel engaged. You become comfortable with focus. This is rare. Most people cannot sit with a single task without reaching for distraction. Not because they are incapable, but because they have never trained the muscle of sustained attention. The stem must be strengthened daily. Self-control is not tested in extraordinary moments. It is tested in ordinary ones. Waking up when you said you would. Beginning work when you planned to. Stopping when you intended to stop. These small moments compound. And compounding is the hidden architecture of discipline. There is a misconception that dramatic effort produces dramatic results. In reality, consistent moderate effort produces exponential results. Consider two individuals. One works intensely for 3 days, then collapses into distraction for 4. The other works moderately but consistently for 7 days. At the end of the week, the second individual has produced more and strengthened discipline in the process. Intensity feels powerful. Consistency builds power. This distinction matters, because intensity depends on emotion. Consistency depends on structure. The Lotus Method does not ask you to become extreme. It asks you to become stable. Stability creates reliability. Reliability creates self-trust. And self-trust is the foundation of confidence. When you repeatedly do what you say you will do, your relationship with yourself changes. You no longer question your own promises. You no longer negotiate endlessly. You begin to act with quiet certainty. This is the hidden benefit of discipline. It restores integrity between intention and action. But there is another challenge waiting here: ego. As discipline strengthens, pride can appear. You begin to feel superior to distraction. You may judge others who lack consistency. You may become rigid. Rigidity is not discipline. It is insecurity disguised as control. True discipline remains flexible but firm. It adapts without collapsing. It bends without breaking. The lotus stem is strong, but it is not brittle. This means allowing imperfection without allowing regression. You will miss days. You will experience resistance. You will occasionally choose comfort. The difference between the disciplined and the undisciplined is not perfection. It is recovery speed. When you slip, do you spiral? Or do you return? Every return strengthens identity. Every quick recovery reinforces the belief that you are someone who does not stay down. This matters more than flawless execution, because flawless execution is unrealistic. Recovery is sustainable. The stem does not grow in isolation. It grows toward the surface, and that surface represents something deeper: focus. Without focus, discipline disperses. You may have self-control in isolated moments, but without directed attention, progress remains fragmented. This brings us to the third stage of the Lotus Method. Bloom. But before moving forward, pause here. Examine your own stem. When discomfort appears, what do you do? When boredom arises, how do you respond? When motivation fades, what replaces it? These questions reveal your current training. And whatever your current pattern is, it can be reshaped. The stem is not fixed. It strengthens with repetition. And once it is strong enough to reach the surface, something changes. You no longer struggle against distraction. You rise above it. When the lotus finally reaches the surface, it blooms. This is the stage most people attempt to enter first. They want focus. They want deep work. They want flow. They want hours of uninterrupted concentration where productivity feels effortless and progress feels visible. But bloom is not the beginning. It is the result. Without root and stem, focus collapses. Without clarity and self-control, attention fractures under the slightest pressure. The bloom represents mastery of attention. And attention is the most valuable currency in the modern world. Every notification, every headline, every advertisement competes for it. Entire industries are designed to fragment it. The more scattered your attention becomes, the more reactive your behavior becomes. Reactive behavior cannot sustain discipline. Disciplined people protect their attention the way others protect money. Because attention determines output. If you cannot hold your focus on a task for extended periods, you cannot produce meaningful work. You will start often. You will finish rarely. And finishing is where identity solidifies. Deep focus is not natural in a distracted environment. It must be trained. Your brain adapts to what you expose it to repeatedly. If you frequently switch tasks, check messages, interrupt yourself mid-effort, your brain becomes efficient at switching and inefficient at sustaining. If you repeatedly work in concentrated blocks without interruption, your brain adapts to sustained effort. It becomes easier over time. But at first, it feels uncomfortable. Silence feels heavy. Stillness feels unfamiliar. You may experience restlessness within minutes. This is not inability. It is withdrawal from overstimulation. The bloom stage requires structured focus, not vague intention, not, "I'll work when I feel like it." Structured. Set defined windows of uninterrupted effort. Remove visible distractions. Eliminate optional inputs. Commit fully for the duration. At first, your mind will resist. It will suggest checking something quickly. It will invent small tasks that feel urgent. It will seek novelty. This is where the stem supports the bloom. Self-control prevents interruption. Clarity reminds you why the task matters. Environment reduces friction. Focus becomes possible. And as you sustain these focus periods, something changes. Time begins to feel different. You move from scattered action to immersion. Work deepens. Understanding sharpens. Progress accelerates. This is the paradox of discipline. When structured correctly, it produces freedom. Freedom from mental noise. Freedom from constant reaction. Freedom from fragmentation. Most people believe discipline restricts life. In reality, it expands it. When your attention is under your control, you are no longer controlled by impulse. You decide where energy goes. You decide what receives effort. You decide what grows. But focus alone is not enough. The bloom must be supported by resilience. There will be days when concentration feels weaker. There will be moments when mental fatigue appears. This is where discipline reveals its true nature. You do not rely on perfect conditions. You rely on structure. Even on low-energy days, you show up within the defined window. Maybe output is lower. Maybe pace is slower. But consistency remains. And consistency protects momentum. Momentum is fragile. Break it too often and restarting feels heavy. Protect it carefully, and continuation feels natural. The disciplined individual understands this. They do not chase intensity. They preserve rhythm. Rhythm reduces resistance. When behavior becomes rhythmic, it demands less negotiation. It becomes part of the day rather than a battle within it. The bloom also represents refinement. As focus strengthens, you begin to notice inefficiencies. You see where time leaks. You recognize subtle distractions. You identify habits that undermine progress. And you adjust. Discipline is not static. It evolves. What once required effort eventually becomes automatic. And when automation occurs, new levels become accessible. This is growth. But there is a hidden danger in the bloom stage. Achievement can create complacency. Once you experience productive flow, you may assume you have mastered discipline permanently. You have not. Discipline is not a destination. It is maintenance. Without continued reinforcement, old patterns return. Neural pathways that are not used weaken. This is why the final stage of the Lotus Method matters. Thrive. Thriving means sustaining discipline long-term. Not for a week. Not for a challenge. Not for temporary transformation. But as a stable part of identity. To sustain discipline, reinforcement must continue. Tracking progress is not about obsession. It is about awareness. What gets measured receives attention. When you observe your behavior honestly, you reduce denial. You see patterns clearly. You recognize when momentum slips. And you respond early rather than late. Thriving also requires identity consolidation. At this stage, discipline is no longer something you are trying to achieve. It is something you embody. Your language shifts. Your expectations shift. You do not ask whether you feel like showing up. You assume that you will. This assumption reduces internal debate. Debate consumes energy. Certainty conserves it. The lotus does not question whether it will bloom. It grows toward light because that is its nature. When discipline becomes part of your nature, resistance weakens. Not because effort disappears, but because identity aligns with effort. There is one more element required for thriving. Grace. Without grace, discipline becomes rigid. Without flexibility, burnout appears. You must allow space for recovery without allowing space for collapse. Rest intentionally. Pause strategically. But never abandon structure entirely. A single missed session does not define you. Repeated avoidance does. Return quickly. Always return. The power of the Lotus Method lies in its integration. Root gives clarity. Stem builds control. Bloom cultivates focus. Thrive sustains identity. Remove one element and discipline becomes unstable. Integrate them and discipline becomes durable. Unbreakable does not mean unchallenged. It means resilient. Challenges will appear. Stress will increase. Temptation will evolve. But the structure remains. And when structure remains, growth continues. Unbreakable discipline is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not need validation. It reveals itself quietly in patterns. In the person who shows up when no one is watching. In the one who continues when the novelty has faded. In the one who follows through when emotion offers an exit. At this stage, discipline is no longer a struggle against yourself. It becomes cooperation with your future self. Most people live in tension between who they are today and who they want to become. They promise change in moments of clarity and betray that promise in moments of comfort. Over time, this creates internal distrust. And internal distrust is heavy. When you do not trust yourself to follow through, every goal feels fragile. Every commitment feels uncertain. Every plan feels temporary. The Lotus Method repairs that fracture. Not through hype, not through force, but through repetition aligned with identity. When you repeatedly act in alignment with long-term intention, your internal narrative shifts. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries. You begin to see yourself as someone who executes. Execution builds self-respect. Self-respect strengthens discipline. And discipline reinforces identity. This cycle becomes self-sustaining. There is something important to understand here. Discipline does not remove desire for comfort. It does not erase temptation. It does not transform you into someone who never feels resistance. It transforms your response. Resistance becomes background noise rather than a command. Comfort becomes optional rather than compulsory. You begin to experience a quiet detachment from impulse. Not suppression. not denial. Choice. And choice is power. The undisciplined mind reacts automatically. It follows mood. It follows convenience. It follows familiarity. The disciplined mind observes impulse and decides. This observation creates space. And in that space, transformation happens. Think about how often your day is shaped by automatic behavior. Reaching for your phone without intention. Delaying tasks without reflection. Consuming information without direction. Each automatic behavior reinforces a passive identity. The Lotus Method replaces passivity with intention. It does not demand dramatic reinvention. It demands consistent alignment. Small aligned actions repeated daily create structural change. Structural change outlasts emotional change. When people attempt transformation through intensity, they burn out. When they attempt it through structure, they stabilize. Stability may not feel exciting, but stability compounds. Years from now, the difference between someone who trained their brain for discipline and someone who relied on motivation will be visible in results, in confidence, in calmness under pressure. Discipline produces calm, because you know you will act, because you know you will follow through, because you no longer depend on inspiration to move. And there is freedom in that certainty. Many chase freedom through comfort, through escape, through avoidance of effort. But avoidance breeds dependency. True freedom is the ability to act regardless of mood, to choose effort when it matters, to stay steady when distractions intensify, to maintain focus when noise increases. The lotus rises not because the water is calm, but because its structure is strong. Life will not remove mud from your surroundings. Responsibilities will grow. Stress will appear. Temptations will evolve. Technology will continue to compete for your attention. You cannot wait for ideal conditions. You must build internal elevation. This is the final contrast. Motivation is external. Discipline is internal. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is structural. Motivation is reactive. Discipline is deliberate. When you train your brain correctly, discipline becomes default. Not forced, not dramatic, default. And once it becomes default, progress becomes predictable. You do not wonder whether you will act. You expect it. Expectation shapes behavior more reliably than desire. This is why identity matters so deeply. When you adopt the identity of a disciplined person, you remove negotiation. You stop asking whether you feel like it. You begin asking what needs to be done. There is maturity in that shift. And maturity is the silent foundation of unbreakable discipline. Understand this clearly. Unbreakable does not mean flawless. It means persistent. You will experience low days. You will encounter doubt. You will occasionally fail to meet your own standard. But the disciplined individual does not collapse into self-criticism. They analyze, adjust, continue. Continuation is the hallmark of discipline. And continuation is built through the lotus structure. Root, clarity and environment. Stem, self-control and delayed gratification. Bloom, focused execution. Thrive, identity and reinforcement. Integrated together, they form resilience. Without integration, discipline remains fragile. There will be moments in your life when circumstances challenge everything you built. Fatigue will test you. Unexpected events will disrupt your rhythm. External pressure will increase. In those moments, motivation will be absent, but structure will remain, and structure carries you forward. This is the quiet advantage of training your brain instead of chasing inspiration. When inspiration fades, trained patterns persist. When emotion fluctuates, reinforced identity remains. When distraction increases, practiced focus activates. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, your life shifts. Not because of a dramatic breakthrough, but because of repeated alignment. One disciplined decision at a time. Years from now, you will not remember the exact day discipline became stable. It will not feel cinematic. It will not announce itself. You will simply notice that you act differently. You respond differently. You trust yourself. And that trust changes everything. The Lotus Method is not about productivity alone. It is about sovereignty. the sovereignty of directing your own behavior, the sovereignty of choosing long-term over immediate, the sovereignty of rising above impulse rather than being ruled by it. The lotus blooms above mud not because the mud disappears, but because growth continues. Your environment may remain chaotic, but your structure can remain steady. Train your brain not for bursts of intensity, but for sustained alignment. Train it to find satisfaction in execution rather than applause. Train it to normalize discomfort as part of progress. Train it to return quickly after missteps. Train it to protect attention. Train it to reinforce identity. And over time, discipline will no longer feel like effort. It will feel like who you are. Unbreakable discipline is not built in a single decision. It is built in thousands of small ones, made quietly, repeated consistently, aligned intentionally, and when it finally takes root deeply enough, you will not need to force yourself forward. You will rise, like the lotus, above the noise, above the distraction, above the mud, and you will remain there, steady, focused, and free.